Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on top of page 1222. Aleph Reish Chav Beis. You want to follow along the text? If you need to find it online, it's at ayinbeis.com. Okay. So, put things into context. We began discussing what does Avodah, the work, man's service and work in this world and good deeds, Torah and Avodah, and studying Torah and doing mitzvahs and generally serving God, how does that increase the energy generated in Gan Eden? We learned what Gan Eden is on its own level, as created by God. But what is achieved through Avodah, which began really on page 1211, where he started speaking about Gan Eden in general. But more specifically, at the bottom of page 1220, since I said to you that we're going to get back to it, it's actually 30 more pages until the Rebbe Rashab gets back to the discussion Gan Eden, which will be on, I believe, on page, let me see here. Yeah, 1254. We're now 1220, 1222. So in 32 more pages, we're going to get back to Gan Eden. That means that all this that we're discussing now is helping to understand the whole picture. And remember, in Ayin Beis, in the general Chassidus, it's not just about Gan Eden. Gan Eden is also part of a bigger picture. And what is that bigger picture? The interface between godliness, between God and existence, and how we connect, both understanding how God created existence and how we reconnect existence and integrate in our own lives godliness, each person at their own level. So Ayin Beis is a comprehensive blueprint to achieve that. And Gan Eden is part of the process because that's the whole point of Avodah. Avodah adds, God created Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, and within that, he created a level called Gan Eden, which manifests the essential pleasures, the pleasure of the divine, as we learned. But then there's what we need to do to connect to that, as well as increase and generate more energy, ultimately fulfilling the purpose of existence itself, which is to make a dir b'tachtenim, to make this material world a home, a comfortable environment for the spiritual and for God himself, for godliness, which of course will be realized when Mashiach comes. So all this is part of that picture. Keep that in mind. As we move back to the small picture, it's always important to keep in mind the big picture. So where are we now in the specifics? So he began explaining to understand this additional energy generated through our work, which transforms this world and increases and makes Gan Eden a far richer garden, basically, with much more abundant produce, fruits and pleasure and everything, just as a gardener does in the physical world. So where are we talking now? Talking about different levels of Avodah. So it's not disconnected. He just doesn't connect it yet to Gan Eden itself, but he's talking about different levels of Avodah. So he began by saying, just like in Malchus, there's an inner and an outer, so too in Midas, there's an inner Midas, which is where the Moichin are active, which, as we discussed yesterday in the previous classes, it adds much more vitality and chayus and tainug to the Avodah when you have your mind invested and your understanding and the reasoning behind it. And then you have midas that are the chitzenius midas, which is more the midas themselves, the emotions themselves. More specifically, it breaks into 3 levels in the midas: the Chabad, the Chagas, and the Reish, Guf, Regel. So everything divides in those 3 categories in the conscious faculties: the cognitive, the intellect, the Chabad. The Chagas is the actual body of the emotions, and the we called it the behavioral dimension, meaning on a behavioral level, you're following a certain, either imposing it on yourself through netzach or hoid by subjugating yourself to a higher authority. And all that is the 3 different levels in Midas. Now, of course, the lower they are, the lower the level, the more they're not as vitalized and as energized as they are when they're on a deeper level. Like he said, even if a person doesn't have by nature chesed, but you can impose on yourself to have chesed. Even that it won't have a chayis and tainug, it won't have a vitality and a pleasure, but you could say, I'm going to do chesed, either through netzach or hoid. On a deeper level, the midas themselves, like Avram Avinu, someone who's wired to do chesed. It's not based on a reasoning. They're just a kind person. So there, of course, the chesed is deeper than when it's just behavioral, because it's also deeply rooted in the emotions of the person. And finally, there's the Chabad Shebemidas. That's when a person understands, and there's a reason, not just an intellectual reason. It could also be the reason because you love someone. And there, the love and the emotions will be the richest ones. He says, there will have Reiv Chayis, B'riboy V'Chayis Rav. That was the last paragraph in page 1221. Now we're moving to Avodah. What does this mean in our Avodah? It's going from the bottom up. Nihi is the Avodah, what he calls Heskim Bilvad. It's just a determination or a commitment that you make that you're going to do what is asked of you. Sur Maran Asay Tev. Ve'ein bezeh shum ispailas ava v'yira. Like we said before, it's just action-based. It's actionable. It's behavioral. You don't have in it necessarily a feeling of ava and yira, of love and awe, even though that's the root of mitzvahs esa, mitzvahs leisesa. Made a strong determination, a strong commitment to do surmadav asay tev. Avoid the bad and be committed to good. He called that Bade Arovis. It's only the performance itself. And then in the he itself, he introduced another higher level, Badregel Yena Yeser, which is also Nihi, and that's the Perek Tezayin, chapter 16 of Tanya, where there's not just pure behavioral, your mind and even your heart understands and appreciates why one should commit to God, because God is beyond everything. Everything is nullified in his presence, and therefore, as I said, it's fitting and appropriate. It makes total sense that one should become absorbed and long and ache to become, or long and connect, to connect and become completely sublimated in that godliness. And he quoted the Tanya at length at the bottom of page 1221. So though now it's a higher level of Nihi, it's not just pure action. It's not like, for example, a child. You teach a child to wash negelvasser, or to say moda'ani, or to give tzedakah. That's pure behavioral. That's Nihi. There's no deeper connection. We're not talking about inside the etzma nasham. We're talking about on the level of giluyim, on the level of the faculties of the child. It's purely behavioral. Obviously, it's training the child. As the child grows, the child will develop a deeper connection with these behaviors. Second level in the heat, there's contemplation. There's a mind at work. However, it hasn't been internalized that you actually feel fully that you're completely absorbed. You realize and you appreciate both intellectually and emotionally the value of it. And therefore, therefore you're determined and you commit to doing on an action-based level mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs, l'kaim kol hatayag mitzvahs. But the derech klal, this is a level of heidah, top of page 1222, just acknowledgement, it's accepting, v'heskim, and as we said, the commitment, the determination, hanasa yidezeh, shezeh b'chinas netzach v'heid, ve'ein b'zeh b'chinas v'chayis b'chinas hispilus. It's not to the effect, it's like you appreciate something, but to say that it's transformed you, to be excited and passionate, that your whole being is consumed with his godliness, no. It comes into action. It does have an effect in your action and your behavior. It does also have an appreciation. Your person appreciates it, but it's still all netzach v'heid. and he doesn't say this, but it's like almost like saying it's like the Chabad and Chagas in Netzach and Hoid itself. Though it doesn't say it here, and I don't believe in Tanya either. But in the context of what he's saying here, it's primarily Netzach and Hoid, but it's a behavioral on a higher level. And as we said, this can be applied to any training, to any given situation, and so on. Okay. So this is where we stopped on top, second line on page 1222. He's going to now go to Chagas. But before I go, if anybody wants to ask anything, this was a summary of what we learned. So I didn't say anything really new that we didn't learn yet, but still, since piece by piece, maybe somebody wants to review at some point or clarify something. And if not, we'll continue here. Okay. So second line on page 1222. Now I'm going to go to Chagas. And again, I want to reiterate, this seems to be like a new subject, but the truth is, what he's really doing here, and this is real classic Chassidus, the very fact when we talk about that Avodah adds energy into Gan Eden, which really means it generates energy through the whole Seder Shtalshlus. But that Gan Eden is where it's stored, so to speak, where it's focused, is really, if you don't just talk about it mechanically or technically, like many people say, oh, I'll learn Torah, I'll have a reward in Gan Eden. You know, it's like putting away investment for your retirement. When you understand it, however, in a more detailed way, no, it affects you right now. Even if we don't see Gan Eden, and even if you don't feel what it's generating, the fact is, the most important component of it is your work on it, that you are growing. So this whole discussion here is really about human growth, of how we grow in our service of God, or in different words, how we grow from being a self-interest driven, egocentric individual to becoming a God-centric individual. In other words, growing through the process of recognizing that you're not the center of the universe. It's not all about you, me. And that we're coming to realize and become part of our lives, higher purpose and meaning in life. Nahi is the first step, essentially, because the first step is behavioral, obviously. You always begin on the basic level. But in behavioral itself, we've learned now 2 levels. So as we climb the ladder, you're going to see this is really the part of Ayin Beis where he speaks in terms of how do you do it. So parts of Ayin Beis talk about what these levels are and identifies them. Like we've been learning at length about what Gan Eden is. Before that, we've learned about the different levels of Seder Shtalshlus, Ani Rishon, Ani Achrin, Keser, Malchus. Earlier, we learned about the Yesh Amiti and the Yesh Hanivra and the Ayin, the Emtza, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Ayin of Yesh Hanivra. So a big part of Ayin Beis is also mapping out the entire cosmic order and structure. But then that's like giving you the map. But now we got to travel. Now comes the time to travel. So that's the Avodah part. So whenever you see he goes to Avodah, he's now saying, okay, now that we know all these components and we have all the coordinates, now how do we get there? And how do we travel? That's what we're discussing now. This is vital to keep in mind. Sometimes it's not stated enough but the truth is critical to know that that's the underlying, the undercurrent, and the essence of really what the Rebbe Rashab is doing here. He's giving us now a step-by-step plan of how a person can grow. Now, obviously, this is adaptable and customizable to each person according to their level. Not everyone's behavioral is the same way, just like not everyone's Perek Tazayin, the second level in the behavioral, is the same. But that's already how we personalize it. But the basic steps, we did Nahi. So now he's going to go to Chagas. That's the next level, Chagas. So now we called Chagas, remember, the emotions, he called it Guf Hamidas Atzmo. Now we're talking about the emotional realm. I also want to add that this is not the first time Ayin Beis discussed these steps. In volume 2, there's a whole section on it that goes back in the beginning of volume 2. Before he started with Hasei L'Chosh Techatzetus, he talked a lot about these levels of Avodah. And in volume 1. So when you really look at the whole Ayin Beis, this is a recurrent theme. Obviously, each time he speaks about it in different language, but it's a recurrent theme, these levels, as we call them, climbing the ladder through Avodas Hashem. Sometimes this is the ladder that we refer to, Sulam Mutzav Arza, the ladder of Tefillah, of davening, 4 rungs, from Brichas Hashachar to Psukkah de Zimra, Shema, and Shemanesrei, or sometimes Brichas, Krishma, and Shema, and Krishma. But regardless, this is a theme that is recurrent in Ayin Beis, and these levels, Nehi, Chagas, Chabad, and of course, it's even higher than Chabad. But we're going to go through these because these are the conscious and things that are in our control directly. And we always have to begin, as I said, from the bottom. You can't climb a ladder top down. You have to climb from the bottom up. Like Yaakov Avinu's dream, Sulam Mutzav Arza, a ladder standing on the ground, and Reisha Magia Hashamayma, and the top of the ladder reached into heaven, which is a symbol of davening, and the Malachim Elim V'Yerdim Bei. And basically, this is the story of life, the journey. So actually, just to give a little, make it more geschmack a bit, it says that the Baal Shem Tov taught that every Jew can serve God. And the Alter Rebbe taught how every Jew can serve God. And the Frierdiker Rebbe brings from the Rabbi a moshel of a ladder. That the Baal Shem Tov provided the ladder, and the Alter Rebbe taught us how to climb the ladder. So you need to have the ladder, obviously. But you need to also know how to climb a ladder. And that's what we're discussing essentially. I wanted to say one more thing about the Nehi and then Chagas, was that in, I believe was a volume 1, I'm trying to remember when he spoke about this. It'll come to me. I don't remember what I was going to say. I'll get back to it. Okay. So we're going to continue now with Chagas. Chagas ubchinas ispilus hamidus shemispoil ba'ava oibiyira. It's not just behavioral. Behavioral, he said, he's not nispol. Ein boy bezeh bchinas ervachayis bespilus. Chagas is there is some stimulation. Spilus can be stimulation, excitement, arousal, ignited. I mean, the spilus means all of the above, really. I mean, the technical translation is spilus can be excitement, but it's really an emotional reaction. That's really the best way to define it. That there's an emotional spilus hamidus. The midas are actually ignited. Shemispol ba'ava, that is excited either through ava, which is love, or be'ira, or through awe. They're both legitimate emotions. Even yira, standing in awe of something is a feeling. You feel respect, you feel a higher presence. Ava is being drawn to it. So ava and yira, ava. So when you hear someone says they tremble before God, so don't compare that to the trembling before a thief or out of fear. We're talking about trembling because you're standing in the presence of something that is far, far greater than you are. So there's a certain awe and respect. Ava is the feeling of true love, being drawn to it, passionately being drawn. I don't want to use the word passion because that's like a deeper feeling already. Say slavos. But ispilus, ava ebiyira. Oh, now I remember what I was going to say because he's going to say it now. V'hu b'chinas ruach. These levels, Nehi, Chagas, and Chabad, correspond to Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. So we know the Medrash says, and Chassidus explains, Kabbalah and Chassidus explain, that the 5 names that the Neshama has, it's not just names, it's levels, dimensions. Going from the bottom up, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. For now, we're not going to be discussing Chaya, Yechida. Those are the super conscious, and they're Keser, Arich, and Atik. In the spheres, Pnimim, meaning the spheres, the conscious faculties or attributes, Nehi, the behavioral is Nefesh, Ruach is Chagas, the emotional, and Chabad is the cognitive, Neshama. So Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. In volume 2, he talks about this relatively at length. He may refer to it soon, but regardless, it's in the beginning of the first third, something like, I have to look at the page, something like 50 pages into the second volume, he speaks about these 3 levels. And in these 3 levels itself, 2 dimensions in each one of them. So Chagas, he says, Hu b'chinas ruach. U'kamei shekosav, ruach ha'odem hiya elo l'mayla. So the pasuk in Kehela says, Ruach habehema yiredes lamata. The spirit, or you can even say the breath of an animal goes downward because an animal faces the ground. It walks on four. Its head is facing downward. Ruach ha'adam eila lamayla. Here eila lamayla. The spirit, or the breath even, of the human being, because he walks upright, goes upward. So, but it's not just a physiological thing. It's also a spiritual thing. That haruach he kishiyesh b'yispilus lias eila lamayla. So Rebbe Rashab explains what this means. It's not just that he's physically standing upright, it's because on a spiritual level, a human being has a transcendent dimension that looks upward physically, and also we're seeking, like we say, raise your eyes to heaven, and see who's created all of this. However, just because a human has a ruach that goes up, we still have to be in that state of mind, or in this case, state of heart. So he says, when is this ruach, when is this spirit looking upward? When is it reaching, transcending? Is kishiyesh by hispilus lias ela. When there's some excitement, some stimulation, some emotional reaction that's causing it to be ela lamayla. To put it very bluntly, if a human being is involved in garbage, in the mud, in the material pleasures, and looking downward, essentially, being involved in everything that is essentially inferior in life. So even though there's a ruach ha'adam, but right now you're consuming the animal soul. When a person is awakened, his emotion gets stimulated to the point there's a reaction of some type of love or awe of God or godliness. That's inspired lias ela lamayla. In the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab qualifies it exactly this point. He says, "Ve'etzemin haruach," the very ruach itself, the spirit of a human being, by nature, v'hainu she'ispalish. I'm sorry, who shebe'ispashusu b'tenu chiyunish shenirashu chai. That the extension or the expression of his very life force, the movement of his life force, that a person is moving, and you see that he's a living person. So in other words, ruach on its own doesn't necessarily require this hispilus of a midah, because a human being could be biologically alive and functioning well, and that ruach is also one where a human being walks upright, and in general, he's a seeker. I don't know if that's what he's referring to. Here it sounds very much more biological, because it says that the ruach, that he's talking about the etzemin ruach, is just the bare fact that he's alive. But then you could ask, why is that not nehi? Why is that not a nefesh? Nefesh chai, nefesh is also alive, biological life. Ruach seems to suggest something more than just pure biological. That's what I'm wondering about the parentheses. But I think but nevertheless, I think what he means is that it's not just a human being is alive like an animal is alive. There's something unique about a human being, even without his pilus hamidus of ava v'yira toward godliness. A human is unique. That's the pasuk actually says. The behema, ruach yiredes lamata, behema, its focus is purely survival. A human being, by definition, his ruach is more than just survival. So it could be that the fact that he's alive as a human, that's the ruach part of him. That's what it looks like he's saying in the parentheses. However, the focus here is not on the fact that he's alive, or that's a sign that he's alive and he's a human being that's alive. We're talking here ruach, and the more the Avodah, like he says, because you could have also a person like a zombie is also alive, or somebody who's just not motivated and says, I'm not driven. People say, I feel emotionally dead. I feel numb, and so on. Here he's talking, of course, the ruach, where there's a spilus of amida, where some aspiration, there's some type of longing for something. So
like
that
explain a toy that is moving.
Hold on.
Same thing.
A
toy that is moving is not alive.
We made a decision. Let me finish. You could add anything you like. I cannot have one-on-one conversation. It disturbs the others that are learning. We have to keep this disciplined. So please just control it. If you want to keep it, write it down if you think you're not going to remember. So I'll upon him, the etzem, so the etzem ruach, inyan haruach in the parentheses, but the focus here is on obviously a human being. There's levels of life. You can be alive and you can be alive. And so he's talking here about that there's a spilus lias eila lamaila. But nevertheless, he's going to now qualify that even though this is taka midah, it's not nihi, it's not purely behavioral. Even the higher level of the behavioral of nihi, but it's a midah. So now you have an actual emotional reaction. You're feeling something, and yet it's still not chabad, which is going to qualify. Now I shall pause. Please go ahead. What will anyone like to say?
Nothing. I only added one point that you said. Sometimes a person is saying that he's not alive. I said, like a toy, you're taking a train that is moving. It's not alive. It's moving. It's a battery. It moves. But ruach is high. I just added this point. That's it. Make sense?
Yeah. Well, that for sure makes sense. But the point was, I was trying to distinguish between the chai of a human and the chai of an animal. In other words, why is this not called nihi or nefesh? Why is it called ruach? But that was what I was trying to explain. But yes, absolutely. There's the element of him being alive. I was going further to explain why it's ruach and not just nefesh. But okay, fine. Anybody wants to ask anything, or should I continue? So he says now like this. I'm on line 5, after the parentheses. So now we established you have now some emotion. To use example we spoke about yesterday, let's say you're training someone to do a job. So the first steps, you're training them to do these and these steps. They're not yet experienced, and it's not become yet part of who they are. So they're going through the motions, but they don't have emotions, which means they're not a feeling. There's no feeling in it. Now, in the first steps, that's not a bad thing because you have to begin somewhere. But then there comes a person where it begins to grow on you, as they say, and you begin to like it. There's already a feeling that's involved. So you could ask someone, do you like what you're doing? No, I just do it. It's a job. Or someone says, no, I like it. I've learned to like it. There's an emotional, so of course, that's a deeper connection. Someone that likes what they're doing or likes what they're involved in is going to be more committed to it. And it's also going to be more part of who they are. So it's just a very balabatish, practical type of step. However, hein midas tivim. And yet chagas, for all its emotional value, it's midas tivim. It's natural midas. V'hainu, what does that mean? Before we learned it as someone who's wired to be a bal chesed. He's a kind person. Just by nature, he's just a kind person. So he's going to explain what that means in Avodah. V'hainu, that means shayispayla shalahem, their excitability, their reaction, their emotional reaction, their emotional stimulation, eina mitzad haseichel. It's not due to seichel here really means that there's a whole reason behind it. It's not you're naturally wired, but there's a power behind the emotion. Is due to the natural midas themselves. Like we said before, a person happens to be a kind person. In Chassidus, it talks about that when you're a kind person by nature, even though that's beautiful, but it's natural to you. So it's really not an Avodah. Now he's saying, so Teva Midas Atzman has no question it has value, not dismissing it. But if you're in relation to Mitzat to Seichel, it's Teva Midas Atzman. That's their very nature. V'hainu, and that means Shamidas Hamudvoyim boy in Etzle Bizgalus. On this level of Chagas, it means that his natural midas, what are ingrained with Voyim boy, they're ingrained, embedded, rooted within him. They're now in a state of Izgalus. Because you could have the midas, a person should be wired a certain way, and nevertheless, it's not revealed. But Avodah, Chagas means the midas are revealed, but it's still your natural midah, the natural feeling that a person has. Just to give an example, talk about Avos Yisrael. So some people, you naturally, if you're a natural person, you have natural liking to people. So you like someone, not because the pasuk says so, or because it came with any contemplation. You like the person. What happens if you encounter someone that's not likable? Like the Gemara that says that the Tana saw a person who was very unbecoming. And he said to him, Kama muchuar, how ugly is this individual? And he went and responded, Leich le'uma shasani, go to the craftsman who created me, which itself is a very strange story. How could a Tana speak that way? Literally insult someone. So the Mefarshim talk about it. I don't want to go into that right now. The point is, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Ereves habrius, that the mere fact that they were created by God, brius, is enough reason to love them. But that requires a contemplation, because on the surface, the person may not be becoming. So when you're naturally wired, it's beautiful, and you're feeling it. But will it work as well when something doesn't seem naturally, you're naturally inclined to? Just showing an example how the natural midas have their limitations, despite, while also valuing their quality. So basically, we have now his galus hamidas, but they're midas ativim, the way the person is actually wired, and the level is now higher than just behavioral, because now there's a feeling, there's an actual emotional feeling. However, the emotional feeling is a natural, inherent one. The Rebbe Rashab continues. And even though this emotional reaction, the stimulation of the emotions, or the activation of the emotions, or the feelings of the emotions, now he's qualifying, saying, you have to say that it comes through some seichel, some intelligence, and some contemplation. The EF Shalias is Pilus Aliki, Blishum Seichel Klal. Okay. Because you cannot have an excitement about godliness, an emotional reaction about God, without Seichel at all. Let me read inside and then I'll explain. Ki HaNefesh Aliki is from a B'chinas Atikun. Before I read on, let me explain what he said right now, then we'll read further. Because we have to make a distinction here. Midas tivim, most of us think immediately the things I love naturally. I love my spouse, I love my children, I love certain people, I love Torah, I love God, whatever it may be. So basically, you're talking about natural love. Doesn't take any work at all. But that's not what he's talking about here. It's a very important distinction, because in Chassidus, there's always this confusion when you learn that you think midas tivim means how you're wired, as I've been discussing. It's true that when you talk about Chabad Chagas Nehi, Chagas is about how you're wired. But when you're talking in Avodah, you're not talking about that you naturally like something. You're talking about how you activate the natural Ava within you. So when it comes to godliness, it's very different than when it comes to loving your brother or sister or your parent or your child or your spouse. Because there's a biological element. When it comes to God, even though be'etzem every Jew loves God, but there's no biological element that it just comes naturally. You wake up in the morning and you love your children. You don't need to do anything about it. With godliness, because we live in a world where the divine is concealed, you need to activate it. So there's an ava misuteres. We all have an essential love concealed within us, but that's not naturally exposed. So how do you get it going? How do you generate it? So in midas tivim itself, even though he calls it tivim, he's talking here that you need something to awaken that love. Ani yishena v'li. You can be asleep and your heart is awake, but nevertheless, you need to do something to ignite it, to stimulate it. That's why he's qualifying and saying we're not just talking about pure natural love that doesn't come through any Avodah. Because remember, this whole piece is about Avodah. The behavioral is through Avodah, that you're getting yourself to do it at least, to commit to it. And the emotions is also an Avodah. So therefore, it needs any Eza Seichel Vizbonus, because you need something to wake it up. Now, could a person just, out of the blue, just have a feeling of love? Listen, we see that. You can be walking in the street and then just have a feeling of appreciation to God. That does happen. But that's more of a moment of grace, like an Asusa de Le'ela, that you just had something that woke you up. It's not through your effort. We have that. You could be Yom Kippur sitting and davening, and without really even doing anything, just something wakes you up. It could be the singing, it could be the other people, it could be the awesomeness of the day. When we talk in Avodah, we're talking about something that's coming from your effort. So this is critical in this whole component here, in this discussion, to distinguish. So in the mashal, or in the explanation of Chabad Chagasni, you can talk about behavioral, emotional wiring, like Avram naturally was a Baal Chesed. But to activate it, you need something. And maybe that explains the parentheses that Avram had a kavana. He was a natural chesed, but then when he knew that he wanted to be Mefarsim Elikus to the world, that's when he activated it. So it could be this line here explains that a bit. We talked about that yesterday. But so it's not a contradiction. The fact that you may have a natural inclination or natural wiring. Still, here we're talking the Avodah, so there has to be some seichel or isbonenus. And the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain this now a little deeper. Why is that the case? He says, Ki hanefesh alikis hu mebchinas hatikun. Because of course we're talking about the divine soul. It's rooted in tikkun, the world of tikkun. Ubetikun kachu. And in tikkun, that's the way the order is. The process in tikkun is the chol gili ha'yadei ha'meichin dafka. That every gili comes from meichin. This is an interesting klal he's stating right now. So in tikkun, we know tikkun is atzilus. It uses the word tikkun because sometimes when you talk about atzilus in the context of a perfect world, in contrast to toihu, which is a chaotic world, and the eris and kalim are not balanced and not integrated. So you call Tatzilus as the balance of the harmonious world, tikkun. So in tikkun, the order is, we know, keser, chabad, chagas, nihi. In a human being below, we're not in the perfect order. We don't usually necessarily go in that order. A person can start with nihi, you can start with chagas. I mean, look at most of our decisions. Most of our behavior, is it based on everything we contemplate first and then we feel an emotion and then we act on it? No. We're constantly doing things based on impulses. And remember, we also have to deal with a nefesh abamis, whose primary force is impulsive behavior. Like he says in chapter 9 in Tanya, Mishkan, the residence of the animal soul is in the heart, and the heart is driven by the blood, which is an emotional impulses. The mind is the place of residence for the divine soul, and that's meichin, reflection. Moyech shalt ala lev. So the fact of the matter is that in tikkun, however, which is the perfect world, doesn't work that way. You don't have Chagas or Nehi running the show. Everything starts with a plan. God's Kesser, we learned, Ani Rishen, Kesser informs Chachma, Chachma informs Bina, and from there, it goes into the world of emotions. And from emotions, Chagas into Nehi. Since the Nefesh Alikis is rooted in Tikkun, in the world of Tikkun, and Tikkun, everything, like he says, Kol Gilu Aidea Mechin. So therefore, even the midas of the Nefesh Alikis are so-called born out of a contemplation. But he didn't finish. Let's continue. V'zeh inyan Adam. And this is what makes an Adam an Adam. We're talking, of course, the perfect template of an Adam. The ima yeshe bechinas midas, even though a human being is essentially an emotional creature, I think we said before, even on top of page 1221, what did he say? Where was it? Where did he say that the main Adam is Eitz? Adam Eitz up. Adam b'chal b'chinas hamidus. the sixth line on page 1221. The Adam b'chlal b'chinas hamidus Adam eitz asada. So even though an Adam is an emotional creature, Makol Mokim, nevertheless, Ikir Ma'alose hu seichel. His primary quality that makes him different from every other creature is his intelligence, his ability, and his intelligence. V'hainu shegam gili hamidus v'ayidei seichel. That also his emotions should be guided and be driven through seichel. With an animal, you cannot say that. Even though animals have seichel, it's called seichel hadas hanikna or seichel hanikna, which means a natural inherent seichel. But it's seichel hanikna means it's just simply natural, and they use it for what? They use it to survive. You'll never see an animal sitting and contemplating on the purpose of existence or contemplating how to make their life better. It's all about seichel hanikna, das hanikna, which is about nikna means like not seichel on its own. It's like
inherent. Inherent.
There are different meanings for it. The nikna, inherent. A human being also has inherent seichel. So inherent is not the only word I want to use. Nikna means more natural seichel, like a natural seichel they have to fulfill the needs that they need to survive. Nikna comes from the word kinyan, which means also acquired. Nikna could also be seen actually not as inherent, but the opposite, that it's acquired and not inherent. But that does not what it means, because it's not acquired. They don't learn it from somewhere. It means it's not seichel in its purest form. It's part of their wiring. That's the best way to put it. Anyway, bottom line is that this seichel is used for what? For hunting, for breeding, for mating, etc., etc. When it comes to a human being, we can use abstract mind. We can actually stop our emotions. Is it possible to ask a lion in the wild to fast on Yom Kippur? No, if it's hungry, it's hungry. If it's not hungry, it's not hungry. It's driven by its emotional wiring and its impulses. A human being has the capacity to override emotional impulses, and they should be guided by the mind. It doesn't mean we do it all the time, but it means we're capable of doing it. This is a very central theme in Tanya, starting chapter 9, chapter 12, and so on. So this is what he's saying. So an Adam, though he's a b'chinas midas, but ikar ma'alose, his main quality is seichel. That means also the gili hamidus comes through seichel. So based on this, why are you saying that Chagas in the Avodah, that the stimulation of emotions of Ava v'yira is just purely natural? It's not. Since the nefesh keeps comes from tikkun, everything is driven by seichel, because it's not just how we're wired; it's also driven by a whole process. Chabad chagas nihi. So also chagas is driven by seichel, the way it should be. We're not talking about the way it is in actuality that human beings follow their impulses. So why is the Rebbe Rashab basically asking on his own question? He says that it's not just midas atzmon. Like he said, so now he's going to explain. Here's the answer. Nevertheless, who shaharia ava v'yira, the love and awe, yeshnam b'teva b'nefesh alikis. Love and awe are there naturally ingrained and wired into the divine soul. Ubchinas ruach, this second level we're talking about, chagas, who shamidas aimdim b'izgalis, that these midas that nefesh alikis has naturally are coming in a state they're revealed. In the first step, they're not revealed. There's no midas involved. It's behavioral. Here they're revealed. So you have two things going on. One hand, it's part of the wiring of the divine soul. Second hand, something revealed it. It's easy to reveal them just with a little contemplation. So he's saying the following, that's which I said earlier, that there's no seichel is not correct. it's primarily part of who you are, your natural being. But there has to be something that awakens it. But since we're talking on the level of ruach, the seichel is secondary, meaning it's needed to be a catalyst to awaken and reveal, but it comes easily because the divine soul has natural midas, has natural ava v'yira. So he's not saying what I said was wrong. That's not the right way to phrase it. He's qualifying and saying that what we're talking about, chagas, is not purely how you're wired. There is something that awakens it, but that something called seichel is really minimal. In the sense, you only need a little of it just to get it revealed. Because like we said, you could never say the kids could have love, but how's it gonna emerge? So he qualified that it's not purely just like, for example, an animal, which we know animals never defy God. They don't defy God, not because of any seichel. That's because they're wired that way. The sun and the moon, they bow to God. All the creations, except the human being who has free will and an animal soul, naturally serve God. All the angels. That doesn't need seichel because they're wired that way. With a human being, even level 2 ruach, which is because of the wiring of the nefesh elokis, needs something to get it going. That's what he said here. So therefore, that's this level. B'mat is bonus. U'kamoya avet tivis, like the natural love da ben el ha'av, from a son or a child to a father. She'ein b'izgalus tamid. It's not always revealed. So there's a natural love, but it's not always revealed. Aval b'nakelhu, but it's easy. Love b'izgalus, to bring to the surface and reveal it. Kishiyadei shu avav, miyad eve misnaneya umizgagei elov. When the child contemplates, this is my father. So immediately he awakens the love that was there concealed, and he yearns, mizgagei, he yearns and longs a love. The Chassidus should say a love, but he says mizgagei a love. Okay, not a love, not to him, a love upon him. Now it's interesting, he's saying the love of a child to a father, not the love of a father to a child. And interesting why he would do that, because it seems easier to explain a parent to child, but it does say in Tanya from Zohar that there's the natural love of a child to a parent. But nevertheless, it's interesting why he chose that and not the other way around. The chen b'chol eis, and so to any moment, every moment, sheniska shu avav, that he remembers that he's his father, niseirim izgala. He gets awakened.
Also in Aloha, that a father that is coming to
let me just finish.
No, this idea that you said.
I understand. Let me finish the learning inside, and then you'll say that, please. Just hold.
The same idea, but you said now.
In every moment that he remembers that it's his father, that he gets awakened and it's revealed the love. What is he adding here? He's adding not just one time. It seems the avativis of the benakul love, and this is all the time. So it just proves that there's two things happening. It's there, it's wired, but it needs something and doesn't need a lot, something benakul. It's just easy to awaken and get and reveal. The same thing is lamaila. V'kachu ma'at his bonus leda echu ech ki hu avinu ha'amiti. The same thing, ma'at his bonus, just a little contemplation to know ech ki hu avinu ha'amiti, how God is our true father. That's why he's bringing the mashal, because he wants the mashal from the child to the father, from the neshama, from us to God. That's the reason he's bringing the mashal from ben to av, not the other way around. And additionally, also, is great kindness that he does with us. That he took us out of Egypt. That automatically will awaken the natural love that's already there. So you need some isbananus to get it going. I'm just going to read a few more lines till the end of this, and then we'll stop and we'll hear what you have to say. Okay. And the same thing with yira. That's ava, the chen b'yira. And the same thing, the emotion of awe and respect. Shelo yisrachik melakus. That he's concerned that he should not be distanced from his father, from godliness. Ushelo yaseh sarah be'enov. And that he should not do something which displeases God, that is bad in the eyes of God. So all this, this is something that's natural in the divine soul, and with a little contemplation, it gets awakened, stimulated, aroused, and revealed. So now, in contrast to nihi, behavioral, it has energy and vitality. Raksha chayis, however, this vitality, hu chayis shamidus, is chayis shamidus, is the vitality of emotions. The aim is that gili er hameichin, and it does not have the gili er, the revelation, and the energy and vitality of meichin. Moichin was used here to stimulate, but it was only like a catalyst. The primary thing is the emotion. You need the me'ach, the seichel, he said, just to get it going. But you can't say that this has all the intensity that we're going to learn about Chabad of real meichin and all that comes with that power, which is a higher energy than midas, and more intensity and more passion and more vitality, like we learned before, and we're going to learn soon. So now he explained Chagas. So now, anybody want to ask anything or comment?
No, he said before about the higher level in Nehi. So there is also there something, but this is like no highest in it. There is also some kind of an explanation, which is Meichin. Here in Ruach, there is more than that. There is a highest, but it's Beis the nature is Beis Gavus.
You're asking or you're saying?
No, now I'm saying.
Okay. Well, as I explained, the difference is in the the emotions of the person are not consumed. There's no emotional element. The emotions and the mind understand and appreciate that God is important to be connected with, but it doesn't have a personal Chassidus, like he says here. There's no emotional reaction. He said it clearly. He says, and a Chagas, the Ava V'yira is Beis.
Right.
So that's the key thing. One has an emotional reaction and one doesn't. Doesn't mean emotions can't appreciate. You could say something is good and conceptually I would like it, but it doesn't mean you actually like it. Many times people say, here's a great thing. It's a great thing. They say, so why aren't you doing it? Well, here in this case, the behavioral is there. But why aren't you loving it? It says it's it's in concept, the heart and mind accept it as ye'osa, is worthy. But now there's actually a spilus of midas. Anybody want to comment?
Yo aso, not ye'osa.
Before when we were talking about we need a little stimulation to get Ava to a father and the nimshal is not Ava to the Father in heaven, and it would seem like we have this automatic thing without any stimulation, Ava towards the children, and you would think that Hashem set himself up to have the same thing. Does that also work with Yira? We're not supposed to.
First of all, the reason he uses, I explained, the reason he uses the example of a child to a father, because that's the nimshal is a child to a father, us to God. As far as a father to a child, the fact is, we also see that. A father could have a natural love to a child and still it could be concealed and needs something to awaken it. It can be not because the child, I'm not even talking about a parent that may be angry at a child and doesn't feel love right now. Even naturally, you're not thinking about your child and you need to stimulate it. So as far as that goes, but it's not relevant to our discussion here at all.
I just want to know does that apply also to the father?
One second. One person speak at a time. Go ahead, speak.
So, okay, I know it's not exactly relevant, but what we say about simulating Ava, we need that sometimes. But is there anything we're supposed to have anything with Yira toward the child, or the Abishta? Does it also work with Yira? Is it always the same type of thing that with Yira and Ava?
I'm happy to answer that after the class because it has absolutely nothing to do with this discussion here. You know that, right? It has nothing to do at all with our discussion.
Oh, that's why I know it. Yeah.
Okay. So
I have a question.
I want to finish 1 second. Let me finish discussing the class. Your question is a good question. It has nothing to do with this smimer. I'll answer it afterwards. There's an interesting paper about it. But let me first, since we're already summing up the end of this class, let me go ahead, Yitzchak. Go ahead.
1 second, Rabbi Yitzchak. I was before stopped. In halacha, the avo of the av is stronger than the avo of the ben. If av is coming to steal,
but it's not relevant to this mimer.
No. We're talking about
a nice discussion. I just made the point to Tzvi that this is completely not relevant to this mimer.
But
is
you
it relevant
mentioned the thing. You just mentioned it in halacha.
And I said it's not relevant.
Kill him. And a father, you're not allowed to kill him. That's it. There is such a concept.
Okay. Go ahead.
My question is, what we just went over for Chagas is this and the hisbonenus that takes it to, let's say, activate a particular emotion. Is this the notion of hamoach sholet al halev, or is that Chabad, or is it a different concept entirely from what's going on here?
Doesn't seem like it's related to that.
You understand why I asked, though, right? I mean,
not really. The Tanya talks about moach shalt halev, where the divine soul, which rests in the mind, controls the impulses of the animal soul. Here he's not discussing about the divine and animal souls. He's discussing how a person in the divine soul itself climbs from behavioral to emotional, like he said. And that's why I don't think it has any connection. The only thing that it connects is that a human being has the capacity, like he says, he doesn't even mention moach shalt halev. He mentions that a person has seichel, and his midas al yedei ha-seichel. Gilui midas al yedei ha-seichel. So I probably would not connect it with the concept in Tanya at least. But tell me why you think it's relevant, then I could answer better.
Well, the notion that it takes some hisbonenus, which is I'll use English, which is an intellectual matter, which is a matter of thought, to activate an emotion, and similarly to control it. I mean, I don't necessarily see that hamoach sholet halev. I mean, is, let's say, the idea, I don't know, if I get angry, God forbid, and then I have to think about it. I have to have my mind control my emotion. Or let's say I'm not feeling enough love. So it's like something's wrong. Like I have chesed for somebody, have some rachmanas, and I'm saying to myself, what's wrong with me? I'm being awfully apathetic, and the mind has to...
Exactly. So all that what you just described is not what he's discussing here. Here he's discussing that since a person may have a natural love to God, so when he contemplates ungodliness, it awakens it, like the natural love of a child to a father. When he thinks about his father, it awakens it. So he's not going now into the whole discussion. I mean, the only thing in common is that seichel speaks to midas. If that's what you mean, fine. But since he doesn't use that term, I wouldn't bring it into this so much. It's not really relevant to this discussion. The focus here has to be the following, that we move from behavioral to an emotional experience. Primarily, it's emotion. There's some intellect, because that's how the nefesh elokis works, that you need some seichel to get it, but it's really, seichel is only a little small catalyst. Like he says, Banakal, that it's easy. It's a small hisbonenus that just gets the emotion awake. And that's the main focus here, that there's now an emotional connection to godliness through the midas of Chagas. And you need seichel ma'at, hisbonenus ma'at, to get to that. That's the main focus.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you very much for clarifying.
Any other questions?
Just a comment on seichel hanikna. Maybe it means it's acquired, not in the sense that it's from somewhere else, but it's for another purpose. Like the animal has seichel for the purpose of its survival, but not for its own
Yeah, you could say
for its
that.
own ends.
You could say that, yes. I always understood Seichel Nikna was like when you say something is Beloshen, like there are things that are there fundamental and inherent. And there are things there, like you just said, for another purpose, like a utilitarian purpose. Yeah, you could say that, yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments, anything? No? Good. Okay, so we'll stop here and we're going to deal with Chabad on Sunday, next class, Shiur. So we're stopping here right before Chabad on page 1222. Yeah.